Is true horror seeing something approach, or is it not seeing it until it's much too late? PseudoPod is a horror podcast. Consider this a warning.
PseudoPod, episode 906 for February 13th, 2024. The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Narrated by Alistair Stewart. Hosted by Sean Garrett with audio by Chelsea Davis. Hello all, I'm Sean Garrett, co-editor here at PseudoPod Towers, your host for this extra special Carnival Mardi Gras episode, in which we will be presenting one of the genre's bona fide classics, Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. This story originally appeared in Godey's Magazine and Lady's Book in November of 1846. Do I really need to tell you much about Poe if you're a faithful listener to this show? How about a few random facts? He was likely named after Edgar, the Earl of Gloucester's son in Shakespeare's King Lear. He was an orphan, then taken in by the Allan family, but upon the death of John Allan, while Edgar was living in poverty, he was disinherited from their estate. His reputation, post-mortem, was almost ruined forever by literary critic and rival Rufus Griswold, who, angry at Poe's criticism of his own work, wrote a scathing obituary/biography of the author, filled with lies, painting him as a womanizing madman, drug-addled and bereft of both morals and friends. Your narrator this week, back again, is the incredible, the rhyme animal, the uncannibal, Alistair Stewart. You have already met, I believe? We have a story for you, and we promise you it's true, which I'll have a bit more to say about afterwards.
The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Read by Alistair Stewart. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting, party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical caps and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today, but I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival!" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado!" "I have my doubts." "Amontillado!" "And I must satisfy them." "Amontillado!" "As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchese. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell it." "Lucchese cannot tell Amontillado from sherry." "And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your—" "Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchese—" "I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre." "Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is really nothing." "Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchese, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honour of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady. The bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," said he. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said, at last. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchese." "Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." True, I replied, and, indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresses," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "Oh, it is a huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune licet." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes. The bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the meadow. We had passed through walls of piled bones, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said, "see, it increases, it hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough, it is nothing," he said. "Let us go on, but first another draught of the meadow." I broke and reached him a flacon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with fierce light. He laughed, threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement. A grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How?" "You are not of the Masons." Yes, I said, yes. "You? Impossible! A Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said. "It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado, and we passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, descending again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner, and from the 4th the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavoured to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi, he is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him into the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I will positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depths of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. Then there was a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth. And then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labours and sat down upon the bones. When, at last, the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason-work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and very shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamoured. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and strength. I did this. And the clamourer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. But now there came from the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had such difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke, indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a laugh about it at the palazzo. Overall, the Amontillado," I said. The Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. Yes, I said. Let us be gone. For the love of God, Montressa. Yes, I said. For the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture, and I let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. on account of the dampness of the catacombs, and I hastened to make an end of my labour. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat.
The Cask of Amontillado was the story that taught a younger version of myself what the word immurement meant, and stands as an exemplary form of what would later be dubbed the conte cruel by French writers enamored of Poe. Interestingly, while there are numerous anecdotal stories that the tale is based on fact, and some literary precursors of vengeance through immurement, including Honoré de Balzac's La Grande Bretèche, aka The Mysterious Mansion, some of its actual origins have to do with yet another literary feud that Poe was engaged in, this one with the author Thomas Dunn English. After Poe had successfully sued that author's editors for libel, English published a rather confused novel called 1844, or The Power of the SF, in 1846, which contained a character named Marmaduke Hammerhead, author of the famous work The Black Crow, portrayed as a drunkard and a liar. Poe responded by composing this story, which folds many elements of English's novel into a concise tale of drunkenness and revenge. I once had a writing professor who pointed out that, interestingly, there are arguments to be made that Montresor is also, through obsessive retelling, burying Fortunato over and over again in the actual text of the story, burying him with words and immuring him in the text. And the story may also illustrate that revenge, no matter how satisfying in the moment, is an act you yourself cannot escape from either. You may be telling the story of your triumph endlessly to yourself. If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to pop over to our Discord channel and discuss the show. And on the subject of subscribing and support, PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we're now formally a non-profit. One-time donations are gratefully received and much appreciated, but what really makes a difference is subscribing. A $5 monthly donation on Patreon will go farther than you would believe. Subscribers give us way more than just money. They give us stability, reliability, and dependability. Monthly donations give PseudoPod a well-maintained tower from which to operate. And trust us, you don't want breaches in our walls. If you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out to us at donations@escapeartist.net. Please consider leaving reviews of our episodes or generally talking about them on whichever form of social media seems the least awful this week. By the way, we now have a Blue Sky account. Find us at pseudopod.org. And if you like merch, Escape Artists also has a Void merch store with a huge range of fabulous hoodies, t-shirts, and other goodies. The link is in various places, including our pinned tweet. Check it out. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Ender's Manga. We'll be back this Friday with our Valentine's Day episode, Rare Providers. And finally, PseudoPod knows that revenge is best served cold, like gazpacho soup, unless you're Arnold Rimmer. Good night, folks.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.